You have a TV?
No. I just like to read the TV guide. Read the TV guide. You don't need a TV.
Television addict! Television addict! Television addict!
Hey everybody, welcome to a brand new bonus edition of TV Guidance Counselor, the podcast in which I can read. That is a statement. That is my name. It's also my website, icanread.com, for my on hiatus stand-up comedy career. But, you know, we're getting vaccinated. I am not yet. Hope you are. Hope you're doing okay and you're feeling healthy. And I don't know. I'll be vaccinated eventually, I assume, and people will want to see me out in person at some point. I assume. I don't know. I'm making assumptions, and you know what happens when we assume. I'm babbling now. That's what happens after a year plus in my house, not leaving for more than an hour. But anyway, speaking of more than an hour, this next episode is just that. This is an extra episode this week because I had the opportunity to speak with Scott Ryan. He is a returning guest on the show. Scott has been on 2 other times. He wrote a book about 30-something. He worked in the Blue Rose magazine. He wrote a book about the last days of Letterman. And now he's written an oral history of the TV show Moonlighting, which comes up on this show very often. And I know it is a favorite of my listeners on this show. You can go to Scott Ryan Productions.com and buy the book there, or buy it on Amazon or wherever books are sold. I'm sure they will order it for you. That is Moonlighting an Oral History by Scott Ryan. And this is just a good time. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's bonus episode of TV Guidance Counselor with my returning guest, author of the new book Moonlighting an Oral History, Scott Ryan.
TV is my friend, and it has been always there for me in time of need.
Returning to the show, I think for the 3rd time, Scott Ryan. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back. I appreciate that I have my own room in the green room, and you named the chair after me. I felt very special back there.
And hopefully the plaque was to your liking. It was bronze.
I like gold, but bronze was fun.
Okay. Maybe on appearance number 5, we'll get a gold one. But for now, it worked. But the reason you're back, aside from just enjoying chatting with you and the listeners having enjoyed the episodes you've done before, is you are now written a 3rd book. A second. Yeah. So the first thing you came on, you had a Twin Peaks book in the Blue Rose magazine.
Right.
And then you did the last days of Letterman. And now you've gone back to the 80s for Moonlighting.
Exactly. This is a Moonlighting Oral History. It's told in the same format as the Letterman book. And I have another book that I didn't come on the show for, but that was 30-something.
Oh, that's right. We discussed 30-something, yes.
Yeah, so Moonlighting and 30-something were actually back-to-back. So basically, it's just the Wonder Years. That's all that's left for me to do. And I have totally done ABC in the 80s.
Yeah, although you're not going to go Who's the Boss, Growing Pains?
Was that 80s or is that 90s? That feels 90s to me. It's the 80s.
Because I think, if I'm remembering correctly, Wednesday nights was 8 to 8:30, Who's the Boss, 8:30 to 9, Growing Pains, and 9 o'clock, Moonlighting.
Well, no, Moonlighting was Tuesdays.
Oh, was it Tuesdays? Okay.
Yeah, Tuesdays at 9, almost its whole run. The very end when the show was dying, they put it on Sundays at 8, which is a horrible time slot.
Right.
But I feel like I'm the ABC guy. Bob Iger I'm like, I've never interviewed him, and I want to so badly because I love to tell the story, and I probably told it here before, but it needs to be told forever, that on the same day he canceled Twin Peaks 30-something in China Beach. And I really want to meet him and ask him about that decision.
I'm sure he's like, they all lost money.
Yeah. Well, I think he replaced it with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and that's why he's running Disney and is a rich man. True,
because that Dana Delaney got her Emmy, I think, for China Beach almost a full year later, because it had just squeaked in under the ability to be in that year, and he was probably like, "Oh, that still lost money. Great."
Yeah,
because we had to sort of set the stage for people. So Moonlighting started 85, if I'm correct. There had been, ABC was doing well. NBC had been in the complete dumper in the basement for years, but in the early 80s, Brendan Tartikoff turned it around and it had kind of overtaken ABC. And with the shows that everybody knows now, 84 was kind of the big year for NBC. So you had like Cosby Show, Punky Brewster, Cheers, LA Law, Saint Elsewhere, Hill Street Blues, and all these shows that had kind of, which had started as sort of the quality TV that were on the bubble, but NBC was like, well, what else are we going to replace them with? Let's just keep going until it became a big hit, and Miami Vice. And, you know, they would just hit after hit after hit. A-Team, I think, as well. And so ABC, which generally kind of played it safe, I think, over the years with sitcoms, and was always kind of the middle of the road network. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Started to get a little bit more experimental, or started greenlighting some weirder stuff.
Yeah. And, you know, the thing that I really like to do in these books is to get the backstory of what happened. And on one hand, you know, Moonlighting is famous for a lot of reasons. But for me, and I think you'll find this interesting, Moonlighting is the first show that was owned by the network, aired by the network. And it was a bit controversial at the time because up to that point, it was illegal for that to happen. And Chick Igley is a writer for Moonlighting. He's gone on to do many things. Dark Angel is one of them, but a lot of shows. And he, in the book, says, basically, they knew Reagan was president, Reagan was an actor, and Reagan was not going to enforce that law, that
Right.
There was nothing, he wasn't going to do anything. So ABC got into this water with Moonlighting. So ABC had ABC Circle Films, and that's where Moonlighting came from. So as you go through the book and things start to get crazy with budgets, the thing was there was no end to the budget. It was ABC's budget.
Right. They're charging themselves for their own production, essentially, which is one of the reasons you weren't allowed to do that.
Right.
In a lot of ways. And actually, speaking of Punky Brewster, that was the show NBC did in-house. And I forget what CBS's one, but each network had their own show that they did in-house for the first time ever. And it was sort of when stuff started to get deregulated, and Moonlighting had much bigger budgets for, I think one episode was almost $2 million or something like that, which was unheard of. That's a movie. And it really did up the ante for everybody, because prior to that, and people probably don't know this, you did have to have an independent production company make the show and then essentially lease it to the network.
I mean, and you know, it's so interesting when you think of now Netflix, they'll dump whatever they need to dump into The Crown. They don't care because Gillian Anderson just won the Golden Globe and they got what they wanted.
Right.
And they don't care. And that was sort of what was happening with Moonlighting. You know, the other thing that was crazy about it is that they were never making their deadlines.
Yes.
And I asked every producer, like, but how did you get away with the fact that, you know, it came to be Tuesday at 9 and you just weren't done?
There's no show.
Yeah. And they didn't know, ABC wouldn't know if they were going to make it or not. And they said, because we were getting Emmy nominations and ABC wasn't getting any. They got 16 nominations the first full year, and ratings that were Super Bowl size now. I mean, there's an episode of Moonlighting that 50% of every television that was turned on to Moonlighting. Can you imagine if 50% of people were watching, I can't even think of a TV show that's on now, Chicago Fire.
Right. And that wouldn't even be considered a blockbuster. That was just like solid. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're just like, yeah, it's a pretty good hit. And I would say, yeah, the number 100 of the top 100 in 1985 would be at least double the number one show now in ratings.
Right.
It's just the nature of how things have changed. And I think Moonlighting was the first show, I think it's an Emmy, it might have been a Golden Globe, but I think they're the first show that ever was nominated for comedy and drama in the same year, because it was a dramedy.
Yeah, and Cybill Sheppard never won. And when I talked to her about it, I mean, she said that's because they didn't know really where to put that. And the fact that it was an hour and it was funny, like, it's so funny how much television has changed. And this is just in our lifetime. It's not that long ago since it was on that people were like, you can't be funny in an hour. This is horrible.
Yeah.
And it's just so funny how strict the rules were back then.
And it was unusual to see a single cam shot on film comedy. I mean, there were a few, and the few sort of Goodnight Beantown is one that comes to mind, which started in '82, which I guess was a dramedy, but was shot on film, a huge bomb. You know, there was nothing prominent that people were really used to. It was sitcoms, you know, it's multicam sitcoms. And so it was sort of it wasn't one thing or the other, which was its asset and kind of what hurt it too.
Yeah, I mean, Bruce Willis did win for Best Comedy Actor in '87, but the episode he submitted is Big Man on Mulberry Street, and it's one of the most dramatic scripts they did. He's actually not funny in it at all, but he does a 7-minute dance sequence that's very impressive, and I'm sure that's what won the Emmy for him. I mean, it was definitely deserved, but Cybill also should have won for that episode. But again, she wasn't funny, but they were putting them in comedy.
Right.
And it, you know, what are you going to do? Now, I think that line is certainly blurred and no one really cares.
Yeah. It's there used to be people who are like comedic actors and there still is, but at that point, you didn't put a real actor or a serious actor as a comedic lead, you know, unless they kind of didn't know they were the comedic lead, like almost the Leslie Nielsen thing, you know, where they're just having him play it straight and it's funny. But then once they tell him he's funny, it's terrible. You know, when he starts trying to be funny, it's no good. But, you know, you had these two people, and for people that don't know, because obviously Bruce Willis is a massive, massive, massive star. This was him on the way up, and Cybill had already had her like first career peak and was a little bit on the way down because you were either a movie actor or a TV actor. She had come back, kind of moved back, slid back into TV, and Bruce Willis was on his way moving out of television, which is one of the reasons there were so many issues with the show later on.
Right.
So it was these two sort of tides that sort of met at the right place, right time, but he was relatively unknown. I think, I mean, Bruce Willis did Blind Date before this, and
he actually was discovered for Moonlighting.
Oh, wow.
So there's a great story in the book. I actually interviewed Reuben Cannon, who was the casting director, and he goes through how they cast Bruce Willis. And it's just so funny to read it now because you just can't believe that anyone would ever say this. But he actually got fired because ABC said, look, don't bring us Bruce Willis. If you think Bruce Willis is a comedy action hero, you don't know anything about actors. You're fired. And then he just becomes the biggest action star of the planet for a very long time.
Yeah.
I mean, Die Hard is still the standard today.
Which he was making between seasons of Moonlighting. I think between season 4 and 5, maybe.
Yeah.
And to your point, they wouldn't meet deadlines. And one of the reasons the show maybe isn't as beloved's not the right word, but isn't as high profile now as it could have been. And I think this was true for Twin Peaks as well, and a couple other shows, you know, before Twin Peaks: The Return. They were these massive cultural phenomenons. I mean, these shows were huge. Everybody knew about the show. They were parodied everywhere, and then gone in a relatively short amount of time and didn't get rerun. But in Moonlighting's case, they only made 60 something episodes in 5 seasons, which doesn't sound that weird now, but in '85, I mean, seasons were 22 episodes, 24 episodes. They should have been well over 100.
Right. And they actually had to make one extra episode to be able to be syndicated, because at that point there was a rule that you had to have a certain amount, and they needed one more. So the second to last episode, Bruce and Cybill aren't even in. It's just Curtis and Elise, and that was totally so they could hit syndication. which is crazy. But yeah, I mean, when I was doing research on the book, I found this article from Bill Carter, who, anyone who knows late night like we do certainly knows who Bill Carter is. But at the time, he was the New York Times television critic. And he said Moonlighting aired more reruns from 85 to 89 than any other series that was on at that time.
Yeah. It was always the same episode. Like if you caught a new episode, it was shocking. And to the point where, they played on it in the show. Like they'd come on and be like, hey guys, guess what? It's a new one this week or something. Sometimes they'd have these cold opens, and that breaking the fourth wall was nuts at the time. Like you just, especially show of that profile, some weirder shows were doing.
Yeah. And the, two of the writers, Jeff Reno and Ron Osborne, they went on to write Meet Joe Black and did a lot of great movies. They said because they were writing up to camera, they would write it and then it would shoot that afternoon. That's how close they were writing. So they were doing a mystery and they were filming it as they went. None of the actors knew who did it because they didn't know who did it.
Right.
And they got to a point where they were like, well, we've done 3 acts and there's the 4th act. We don't have time to solve this. So they went to commercial. When they come back from commercial, Bruce Willis as David Addison busts in and he starts laying out how this person did it. And Maddie turns to him and says, when did you figure this out? And he said, during the commercial. Yeah, because they didn't have time to solve it. So they threw that line in and the creator loved it. And that's what sort of started that talking to the camera and just forgetting about solving the mystery. They just would just say how it happened.
It almost didn't matter at that point. And we'll get to the creator in a minute because I think that's a really interesting story there. But it was a show that did a thing that's really hard to do when you break the fourth wall and when you have a sort of a silly show that knows it's a TV show. It really makes it difficult to make you care about the characters or to put the characters in danger because you're constantly aware that it's fake. But Moonlighting managed to do that, which is the hardest thing you could possibly do when you have a show with that tone. And it's almost unique in that aspect.
Yeah, and I don't think very many other shows have really ever been able to do it. Boston Legal did it a little bit. Sometimes, like there were times where William Shatner would say, I'm an icon and things because, he is William Shatner. They did it a little bit, but they never did it within the plot.
Right.
And that's the thing Moonlighting did. They would do it right in the plot. You talk about being put in danger. And I know that there's a time when someone has Bruce at gunpoint and he says, like, you're not going to kill a TV star. And lines like that are so funny. But I think it was the speed that allowed it to happen. They didn't stop for that joke to land. They said it quick and they kept going. And, you either caught it or you didn't. Yeah,
it sort of looked and felt like a normal action mystery show, but if you're paying attention, you're rewarded with those kind of nods and winks. Like you could half pay attention and be like, oh, this is Remington Steele.
Right.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. Or Heart to Heart.
Or Heart to Heart.
All of those shows that, and I watched the show with my parents as a kid. And I can so remember, my dad loved it and I loved it, but we loved it for different reasons. I loved it when they pushed the boundaries and it bothered my dad. He wanted David Addison to be Magnum PI and take that case serious and really find out who did it. And I didn't give a rat's ass who did it and why. I wanted that anarchy.
Yeah, it was as a kid growing up, reading Mad Magazine or, watching Looney Tunes cartoons and that sort of stuff. It really managed to scratch that itch while also being a good crime show, basically, which I mean, that's sort of impossible. And, I bring up Remington Steele because I think he was the co-producer of Remington Steele, who had been a writer on Taxi before that, is the creator of Moonlighting.
Yeah, I mean, he worked for 10 episodes on Remington Steele, and then he sold the pilot of Moonlighting. So he left Remington. And so he had a little bit of, he understood what television was. He understood the detective genre, but it wasn't in his heart. I mean, it's sort of, he said to me, like, you know, you kind of go where they'll take you. And he wanted to make movies. And this is how he was trying to get in.
He made a movie every week.
Yeah.
Sort of, yeah.
And he didn't care. He said, I didn't care about Moonlighting. Like, it's not, when I say he didn't care, he loved his work, but it wasn't his end game.
Right. This was not the realization of his dream and the show he always wanted to have on TV.
He wanted to make movies. He wanted to show what he could do. So he said he just felt it wasn't going to last. So he wanted to do everything. You know, he kind of was a young punk, honestly, and he pissed off a lot of the industry. But for someone like me, I was 15 when I saw Moonlighting, and it changed my life, which sounds crazy if you'd see the show now. But, you know, and then you follow it up with Twin Peaks a couple years later, and those shows showed you what television could do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sort of does for drama what It's Gary Shandling Show or Get a Life or those shows did for sitcom. You know, a couple years later, or sort of, you know, there's a little bit of overlap there. And even Remington Steele, which I think gets written off as kind of a stupid show sometimes, the seed of that show isn't that dissimilar from Moonlighting, in that the whole point of that show is that it's subverting that detective thing. Because if people don't remember, the plot of Remington Steele is there's a woman who owns a detective agency and she's the brains and no one takes her seriously. So she hires like a dumb actor to pretend to be this super spy character that owns the thing, and he doesn't. He's just, and in fact, Pierce Brosnan appears as Remington Steele in a Moonlighting episode.
Yeah, he does, which is fun. And, you know, the other thing that was interesting about what you're saying about Remington and Moonlighting is it's so hard right now to think about the battle of the sexes. And I write about it in my intro where I said, you know, there was this thing that was wrongly called the battle of the sexes, but no one was winning in the 80s. Neither side were winning. But Moonlighting and Remington tried to shine that mirror, because here Maddie owns the detective agency and David has to work for her. And there's a ton of episodes that I have a feeling if millennials saw, they would just be horrified by that any man wouldn't work for a woman. But you have to realize this is a different time.
Yeah, especially in a detective world. You know, that was the stuff of noir. That was the stuff of television for the sort of plays by his own rules, defective detective, you know, for decades had been a staple on television. And, you know, Kojak, like, you just had so many of those types of characters that all of a sudden putting them in Your Boss is a Woman really was a subversive new take on it, which, yes, to your point, it sounds stupid to say that was crazy at the time, but it was crazy at the time.
And it was so interesting because I was blessed to get to interview Cybill Sheppard many times. We've actually become friends and we talk all the time, which doesn't always happen. Like, a lot of times people think because I interview these people, we become friends. It rarely happens. Usually have your time with them and move on. And I really couldn't get Cybill Sheppard to acknowledge how revolutionary the Maddie character was. I mean, I think she's such a feminist that she couldn't see it. You know, she could see that Jane Fonda was, or other people, but I kept telling her, like, you know, do you realize what you did? You know, there's probably girls out there at that time that they're now running a business because they grew up watching you run a business, and you didn't see that on television in 85. Yeah.
And it wasn't done in a way that, like, even that, like, I liked Cagney and Lacey, but the way they did that was, we're just having them be like man cops. They just happen to be women. Whereas her character on Moonlighting was very much an ex-model, very feminine, beautiful woman. She wasn't doing like guy cop PI stuff.
Right.
It wasn't that simple. It was much more complicated, and she was solving the mysteries and was the boss, but it wasn't just we just swapped the genders, which I think
she was definitely a woman.
Yeah.
I mean, very, very feminine.
And that weirdly is what makes it more of a groundbreaking thing.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I struggle with what's going on in television now because so many times they just make the woman a man, and I'm supposed to be impressed or think that the show is groundbreaking. And for the most part, it's not working. One of the big exceptions to that is The Fall. Have you seen The Fall with Gillian Anderson?
It's good.
It's a British show.
Okay.
And she's a detective, and she's solving a serial killer case, and they really let her be a woman. It's not a woman is the detective, it's a man detective, and he's gonna break the rules. I'm in here to bust some heads.
Yeah.
I mean, she's really female, and that's one of the few times where they've been able to do it successful, but most times they just swap. You could put they wrote it for a man and they cast a woman.
Yeah, and then they pat themselves in the back for doing that. Yeah. Whereas it's so much harder to tailor something. The interesting thing about 1985 as well, which was a really odd year for television and movies, it was sort of one of those transitional years, and I think I'd have to check, but I think they aired the same week the first episode of the new Twilight Zone, which was called Shatter Day, written by Harlan Ellison, starring Bruce Willis,
mm-hmm.
and Moonlighting. And you could not get two more different things than those two things. And I don't know if you've ever seen Shatter Day, but it's
actually haven't.
Very, very heavy, very serious. And Bruce Willis is not remotely he's very good in it, but it is heavy, dark, more than anything that the original Twilight Zone was, because they were really trying to be like, we're something different.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the strongest episode of the show, but it was an intentional sort of shot across the bow to be like, this is what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And Bruce Willis was the face of that. And it was the same week or the week after he's on Moonlighting, and it was just a very strange sort of new thing, because he was a new face as well. To your point, he was discovered for Moonlighting. So you got the sense that things were changing, and it was a little bit scary, because I think because even as a kid, when I loved them breaking the fourth wall, it also made you a little bit uneasy, because you were like, what? No one's in charge. Like, this stuff won't get resolved, which, is everything now. There are kind of no rules with that sort of thing. And weirdly, ABC, two shows that I know of that broke the fourth wall and on their cancellation were ABC shows. One was Moonlighting, 89. Mm-hmm. The other was I Married Dora in 88.
I don't know I Married Dora. Which one was that?
This was Elizabeth Pena, plays like a housekeeper who's married to a single dad, and Juliette Lewis was the daughter, and it was like a pretty normal sitcom.
Mm-hmm.
The last episode, and had the will they, won't they, and all that. The last episode, Dora decides she really loves him, and he's flying somewhere, and she's going to go to the airport and tell him. She gets to the airport. He's standing there with his bags, and she says, "What happened?" And he says, "It's canceled." And she goes, "Your flight got canceled." And he says, "No, our show." And they pull back and they show the cameras, they show the audience, fade to black. That's it. And the same year, the last episode of Moonlighting is not that dissimilar.
Yeah. I mean, I love how Moonlighting ends. It ends in a very Moonlighting way. That, ABC just comes and says they got canceled. And they run around trying to get married to save themselves. And it really takes a hard look. And again, Chick Egley wrote that episode. And I talked to him about it. And because he's kind of brutal with the show. I mean, he basically says, you guys squandered it. And the truth is, he's talking to Bruce and Cybill, not Dave and Maddie, because they became very difficult. And one of the directors that I interviewed said, even in the first season, when it was picked up for a second season, according to him, Peter Werner, he said he never saw two actors more sad that their show was picked up than Bruce and Cybill. Because, I mean, as you said, they both were back and they just wanted to go make movies.
Yeah.
They didn't want to do this.
Yeah. And it got even worse when you make Die Hard.
Right.
You know, the closest thing I can think of is like when Eddie Murphy was on SNL in '82. Over the summer, he goes and makes 48 Hours and a huge hit and Trading Places, and then has to come back and be a cast member on SNL. It was like that whole season. He's like, yeah, I'm a movie star now and I know it and everybody knows it, but I have to be here every day. Like it was like he graduated already, but he's still sitting in class, you know?
Well, and I actually do a maybe 2-paragraph thing on Die Hard. And my editor, who is wonderful, David Bushman, he wanted me to cut it. He said, cut this Die Hard thing. He's like, you know, you're really building this movie up and that's not true. And I said, he's a little bit older than me. And I said, no, you have forgotten. I said, this needs to be in here because people aren't going to realize what Die Hard was the summer of '88 and how big Bruce Willis was. I mean, it did change everything because he tried to challenge me on it. And I said, no, I'm not cutting that because it was huge.
It's what established him as a movie star. It's the reason he was able to make Hudson Hawk. That's all you had to say. Like, this movie was so big, he was allowed to do this.
Right.
End of argument.
Yeah, I mean, it was big. And I remember seeing Die Hard that summer multiple times in the theater because you had never seen someone like that. And in a way, he's playing David Addison. Right. I mean, he doesn't break the fourth wall, but he's smarmy. And it's like David Addison stuck in a building. And it was huge.
Yeah. And I mean, he also had sort of a multi-pronged attack at that time, too, because, again, he's basically playing David Addison at everything. In his wine cooler commercials, he had the return of Bruno out. So you're seeing him doing music and this movie and this thing. So it was kind of like, yeah, of course he's going to pick the movie like that. He can now do, he's like, I checked all these things off, you know, in the story of Die Hard, which I won't get into because it's a whole other thing, but that was supposed to be a Frank Sinatra movie 20 years before the movie came out, and would have just been in many ways kind of a generic or sort of also ran kind of action movie, if not for the perfect sort of chemistry of him and the rest of that movie when it happened. And the fact that it was him was a key part of that.
Well, and I watch it every Christmas Eve. And
a lot of people
year,
do.
I mean, it's a great Christmas movie. I know it's controversial, but me and my son love to watch Die Hard for Christmas Eve. I mean, that's our family. And Bruce Willis is not in the book, but he said yes to being in the book, which just didn't work out.
Unusual for Bruce Willis. Like he does not.
I mean, because it just didn't work out. But he's also in my Letterman book. So to get him, I sent him my Letterman book through Glenn Gordon Caron, and I wrote in there, thank you for giving my family the best Christmas movie ever. That's how I signed the Letterman book to him. And it would have been great to talk to him. It just didn't work out. But he really did change movies, and I stand by those 2 paragraphs that was the only time I argued with my editor, and
it's
I'm not taking it out.
And I would be fascinated to see how self-reflective and critical he could be of himself at the Moonlighting time now, because clearly Cybill kind of is, or kind of gets it, I think. And, you know, everyone else is pretty frank about everything that was going on then. And Moonlighting's the first show I remember, and I'm sure there's a show before this, but where we as the viewers were made incredibly aware of all the problems behind the scenes. I mean, the show itself was telling us, but also it was, you know, on magazine covers and TV everywhere. Like it was not hidden at all.
No. And that was new, I think, for every one of them. One of the directors, Alan Arkish, who did the most episodes of Moonlighting.
And who had done Rock and Roll High School and, was
Fame,
a Roger Corman guy too. I mean,
he is the most entertaining interview I ever did. We FaceTimed, and normally I don't like to FaceTime on an interview because I don't want the visual to get in our way. I want them to kind of forget that I'm even listening so I can get to the truth. But I think he needed it because in a way he's almost like a stand-up comic, and his stories in the book are my favorite. I mean, he there's no hold bars with Alan Arkish. So he was saying how he hadn't dealt with, like, when they're filming a scene, he's like, if we're filming outside, if you just pulled the camera like this, it would be nothing but paparazzi. He said they were the biggest things in the world. And that was something that really wasn't happening in television. Like, sure, Dallas was huge or whatever, but you were not having paparazzi come at the set. I mean, now it happens all the time. But back in 85, 86, that just wasn't happening for TV. TV was still small. It was TV.
I mean, it wasn't really even happening for movies, like that sort of spoiler culture, like get a scoop about the content of the show or movie thing was not really around then. Like the paparazzi would get them at a nightclub or something scandalous. They would never try to be like, we got this shot from the set. They're doing a scene on a boat like it is now, and you kind of wouldn't get the movie till you saw the movie or saw the show till you saw the show. So
actually that really is true. To go back to 30 something, and I won't say what the spoiler is because I never do, but there's a major thing that happens in 30 something, and I get that it was 35 years ago, but I will never spoil it because it's too good. And when I was interviewing the creator of that show, he said because they kept it secret, that the press was actually angry that they didn't know it was going to happen. And he feels that's what sort of started we're never going to be caught unawares of what happens in a show. And then, that happened. It would have probably been early 99. Well, it probably would have been before. I'm trying to think when the scoop would have happened. It probably would be 91. So you think of how then with Twin Peaks, with Lost, all those shows in the 90s, how they started to go after, and it was like, we want to ruin a show.
Yeah.
Instead of letting you experience that.
Even Newhart, that finale of Newhart that they kept secret was the same time. And there was a similar kind of like, I can't believe you managed to get this one over on us, where people were less angry because it was a comedy, where I think people feel less invested in sort of what's going to happen. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It was weird to have reporting about the making of a show while it was being made. Before that, we would get, if there was something super scandalous, like, John Eric Hexum shooting himself in the head on the set, that got a lot of press, obviously. But that, it had to be something of that level. It wasn't just like, Mr. T got in an argument with why am I forgetting?
George Papard.
George Papard, like that was happening. Like Mr. T and George Papard's relationship on the A-Team was just as volatile and very similar to Cybill and Bruce Willis's, but no one cared at the time. I mean, they would have the sort of standoffs of, I'm not coming out of my trailer first. You're going to come out of your trailer first. They both stay in the trailer all day, so we don't shoot anything,
Right.
But it didn't get reported.
And there was the love affair between Mr. T and George.
That's true. It was constantly, will they, won't they?
Yeah.
And then once they did, the show really suffered.
Once he pitied the fool, it was just no good.
But that was the other thing. Once they... Was it season 3? I think they finally had Maddie and David get together, and it did ruin the dynamic in a lot of ways. And the last 2 seasons was kind of them constantly trying to re-get it however they could. And I think there's a lot of missteps.
Well, and that is what really started this book for me, because I have been annoyed for years that people say, well, they had sex and that ruined the show. And I thought, well, that's impossible. That can't be true. And so what I tried to do was set the stage of what really happened. the amount of things that are going on behind the scenes on the episode that they shoot where they have sex is ridiculous. And I do think my favorite part of this book, and the reason that I think it might be slightly better than my Letterman book, which would, probably upset a lot of people because people love the Letterman book and I love Dave too, but you don't have this backstage drama with the last 6 weeks of Letterman. You have all nostalgia, but this Moonlighting book, it starts with nostalgia and remembering, oh, that was fun. But then when you start hearing all this stuff, the book comes off the wire and goes crazy, I think. And it all happens. It's just coincidence that it all started to happen when they shot the episode that they had sex.
Yeah, I mean, which was one of and you know better than I do, but one of the reasons it felt like they finally pulled that stunt was to try and like maybe it'll fix or help all this other stuff that's a problem, when in reality, it's like people in an unhappy marriage who are like, well, have a baby, that'll fix it. And it's like, no, that just made everything worse, guys. It was almost that kind of thing.
And it's so weird because if they wouldn't have had sex in that episode, I think the show wouldn't be as famous, because all the backstage stuff that happened then, Cybill getting pregnant, Bruce going off to make Die Hard, Glenn going off to make Clean and Sober with Michael Keaton, it would have happened, then we wouldn't have that episode. So at least you can get Moonlighting till then. I personally don't hate season 4 as much as a lot of people do. I think there is some quality episodes in there. Season 5, the last season, they're phoning it in.
No one wants to be there. Yeah.
Yeah, they're phone. I mean, Bruce Willis knows he's the biggest star in the world, and it was hard to get them to do it. They wanted to go. There's no doubt about that. But there is some, I don't know. I mean, it could be just that I'm a fan, but I think there is still some goodness in season 4.
Well, I mean, there's some interesting things, like the Walter Bishop character they bring in was interesting, and the actor is good, and they wouldn't have needed to do that if they hadn't reached that point. So you definitely get some good things, but it's not, in a lot of ways, it's not the same show, but it's a decent show made with the same people, I guess is how I would distinguish it.
Well, they still, there's an episode called Cool Hand Dave that no one really remembers, but Bruce Willis, in Mistaken Identity, goes to prison for 2 episodes. And they just do so many creative things in those 2 hours. And, it's one of my favorite episodes, and I probably cover it in the book more than somebody wants to read about it. I actually cut a lot of it because I knew that people want to get to the good stuff, but I thought it deserved, because that is the good part about doing something like this. Like, of course, you're going to talk about the Shakespeare episode and the black and white episode, the things people remember of Moonlighting. But I wanted to at least shine the light on the writers who tried to save that show. They tried so hard, and you just couldn't. You couldn't keep it together. When you pull it this way, this is going, Cybill gets on bed rest, and this person, and then Elise Beasley, who played Miss DePesto, she got pregnant, and it was just like so much in real life was going on. They just couldn't keep it together. Yeah,
it's a fascinating story about the show itself, but also a very interesting time in entertainment as well, where I think it was the last gasp of the very distinct lines between television and movies, which is one of, if not the major cause of all the issues in the show. It is kind of that very rigid structure, and it's a show I think people have heard of, but not had a chance to watch.
Right.
For a lot of people. And because it didn't really run in syndication, even though they made that extra episode. I think Lifetime aired it a little bit.
Yeah, Lifetime for a little bit.
And the DVDs came out, but then again, they were out of print relatively quickly. So, and the only people that bought them were people who already loved the show. It wasn't like I discovered this show on DVD kind of thing. And it's weird considering how, Cybill was an even bigger TV star in the 90s. Bruce Willis, obviously still to this day a huge star, that they haven't tried to capitalize on it.
Well, the reason is the music. Glenn Gordon Caron will not change the music. They use Jimi Hendrix. They use the Rolling Stones.
Oh, Motown songs.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much Phil Spector. You want to talk about no contracts? They just called Phil Spector and he brought the master over. They put it in the episode. He went home. You try getting a contract to put that out now. And that is the problem. Basically, Disney owns it, but they don't want to pay for those classic Motown, Rolling Stone, Jimi Hendrix songs. And that's why it's not streaming.
But the Wonder Years made it. Sort of similar songs and era. So it's not...
Well, and I'm sure you're a Quantum Leap fan as a TV guidance counselor. So my wife and I are rewatching Quantum Leap on Blu-ray. We're in
Which look great.
2. Oh my gosh. But the songs are insane. Like, how is Quantum Leap out but not Moonlighting? Like, the songs, it's like every popular 60s song is just playing in the background of every episode of Quantum Leap.
I always wonder if they negotiated a different deal because they knew it was a period piece. Same with Wonder Years. Because you were setting it in period, they were probably at least a little more aware that they would have to license music that might be a little bit difficult to license. Same with China Beach. And whereas it's a contemporary show, they probably didn't bother.
Well, and I was actually surprised because Quantum Leap started in 89 and I would have guessed much earlier than that. But so in the that is 5 years between Moonlighting starting in 85 and basically 90. So maybe just in that amount of time there was different, but they just call like they use It's a Small World in an episode. And Glenn said he just called Disney at the time and he said it would never happen now. And they just said, okay, you can use it. And, and it's like within the episode, you can't remove it. It's too much a part of the things. But as I've been saying, as I've been doing those, like, come on, Disney, why don't you give us one less Star Wars, one less.
Right. Do you really need the money there? Yeah.
Like, just put it up and stream it and pay for the songs.
Yeah, I mean there's a Cheers episode that the whole plot of the Cheers episode is about the Monster Mash. Like, it is this reoccurring joke. It's a Halloween episode, and on streaming and DVD, they replace it. And it doesn't make any sense. Like, it doesn't make sense in the context of the show. And it's almost like, it's not just like, this isn't how I remembered it. You're like, this isn't an episode of TV worth watching now.
Right.
Like, it makes me feel crazy because everybody's talking about a thing that I'm not hearing. Like, what's happening?
Well, and I talked to Glenn about it. And, because I told him, because I'm just a regular person. I'm not in the entertainment business or whatever. So it's always interesting to talk to someone who's in and see the different perspectives, because honestly, I really don't get paid for my work. I mean, everybody
right
makes
there with
more
you, brother.
Yeah. I mean, I do a podcast just like you. I don't get anything. And then everyone makes more off my book than I do, because I can only sell it to Amazon at 50% to begin with. All my books are going to be wholesale to begin with, and I have to pay to print it, edit it, cover, and all those things. So even to begin with, I could never make more than everyone else. So what? I should not make books? That's not why I make art.
Yeah.
So my thing is, why does the Rolling Stones have to get paid for Devil in a Blue Dress? Because you got paid in 1986 for it to be on TV, and it was. Why do you need money today? Like, I think all that stuff should be free. And Glenn immediately flipped that and said, no, artists should always be paid. That's how we live. That's our work. Disney should pony up. They're Disney. They own it. They've got the money. I want everyone to be paid. And I thought, okay, I mean, it's just hard for me because I think I do everything for free.
Yeah.
And the Rolling Stones can't or whatever. you know?
But they shouldn't have to sacrifice because someone else wants to make more money. I think that's the point, where it's almost like, this will be a weird analogy, but when people complain about a $15 minimum wage or something, and I explain to them, I'm like, well, you don't understand. Like, people who work full time at a Walmart are receiving government benefits. Like, they might be getting food stamps and all this stuff. So essentially what we're doing is subsidizing Walmart to make more money for the people up top. They're not, those people aren't just not, doing what they're supposed to do. They still need that amount of money to live. We're just paying part of it so that these people can have a lot of money. And it's sort of a similar thing in that, that's the money they need to license that thing. They made it and that's what it's worth. But people at the top go, well, we don't want to make a little less money. So don't bother, And it also means that all the below the line people, or the people who aren't Cybill and aren't Bruce Willis, are missing out. So they're not getting those residuals, they're not, which can add up. I mean, everyone I know always, inevitably when I'm scrolling through Instagram or something, a friend of mine will be like, got my 1 cent, check today for whatever. But at the same time, like, they would also make money for that, it's,
right. I mean, the writer says that, I think it was Deborah Frank that said, every once in a while she gets a check for 7.5 cents for an episode that she wrote for Moonlighting. And, that's ridiculous, but it's nice that there's money to be paid. And,
there could be more.
It's hard.
That's the thing,
And there should be, and they don't need it. And we need to see its history. My thing that I really don't understand is, why can't everything stream?
Yeah, I agree.
You just have to watch enough commercials. Like, let's say to make enough money for Moonlighting, Moonlighting episode is 49 minutes. And there's a half hour of commercials in watching those 49 minutes. And would that be obnoxious? Yes, it would be obnoxious. But if you really wanted to see that episode, that's what it would cost you to watch. It'd be free for you.
Yeah.
But you'd have those commercials. And I don't understand why that can't happen.
Or even make it available streaming for $1.99. or $2.99 or whatever it is, where now there's almost no overhead for the studio. It's not like we printed a bunch of DVDs. Oh my God, they didn't sell. We're in the hole. It's, you got them digitized. They're probably on a server somewhere in your studio archives. You're not really putting in a lot of work there. So I think we'll get there eventually. I think the studios are in the kind of role where they're assessing all the IP they have and deciding what they can do with it and the value of it versus the cost to release it. And I think they'll inevitably land on, it all lives on this big server, and hey, it's making us more money if 1 or 2 people access it every day than it was when nobody was,
What show would you pay, quote unquote, any amount for because you just want to see it? You miss it, it's not available, and it kills you that it's not available.
That's a question that would have been easier for me to answer 10 years ago. Because I think we have been really lucky in that so many things are accessible now, even outside of bootlegs. Because have you seen the CTV thing, by the way, the Canadian thing that's happened recently?
No.
If you have a VPN and you can get a Canadian IP address, which is not that hard to do, CTV in Canada has streaming tens of thousands of hours of shows and a whole retro channel. And Love Boat, Fantasy Island, all those shows, but a bunch of shows I have not even been able to hunt down in my tape trading days in pristine prints. It's Your Move, Filthy Rich, which was Linda Bloodworth Thomason's first show before Designing Women with Delta Burke. Like, they just have them all on there. And Werewolf, the Fox show, like, it's crazy. And that is where I went, oh, these are all digitized and could be streaming somewhere.
Right.
Canada's like, yeah, we can do it. So like, that was in the last 6 months. A bunch of my shows, to your question, were checked off the list because of that. And I've been able to get like Misfits of Science was a big show that I loved, but I have like German DVDs, or like Baywatch Nights. Crime Story was one I couldn't see forever. Spenser for Hire was one I couldn't see forever. And
I used to love Spenser for Hire. Did it hold up?
It's amazing. It's really great. It's one of the best crime shows of the 80s in that it's really gritty. And
I loved Hawk.
Hawk's great. The Hawk spinoff, not so good. They kind of missed the point by taking him out of Boston and all this stuff. But there's amazing HD prints of all 3 seasons of Spenser for Hire that you can just watch on IMDB TV right now for free. Crazy. So there's not many. Parker Lewis Can't Lose was another one. I would probably say Just the 10 of Us, speaking of ABC, which I love, is one of my favorite sitcoms, and it's just impossible to see. I have not great bootlegs of it, and they're sort of the only ones that exist. And it's I know Warner Brothers has it, it's there. But that's the only one I can think of. What's yours?
For me, it's Picket Fences.
Yeah, because we only got season 1 on DVD?
We only got season 1, and season 2 and 3 are so good. I'm a huge David E. Kelley fan. I'm trying so hard to get David E. Kelley to do a book with me. We, at my company, my partner did Conversations with Mark Frost, where he just interviewed him about everything he did. And we want to make that a series in our company. So I want the follow-up to be Conversations with David E. Kelley, because it's really about writing and how you create a TV show. Mark Frost talks about Hill Street and obviously Twin Peaks and his novels. And I just think David E. Kelley would be perfect for it because I love his stuff. But I just found out that Germany released seasons 2 and 3. So I did buy them and they came and I got them into my computer. You had to switch the subtitle the German out, And because it was all in German, the first thing they came up there in German, I'm like, oh, damn it. But then you could
have to learn German now.
And so we're actually rewatching it and it holds up and it's just my kind of TV. Because I love TV that's funny, but makes you think. And
yeah, I mean, so many of those shows that were in the wake of Twin Peaks and then in the wake of X-Files, really, which kind of was in the wake of Twin Peaks in the first place, were really interesting. And there's some that kind of are lost to time, like that I wonder if they're actually good. And I remember enjoying them. Like what was the one with Peter Horton where he's Brimstone? I loved Brimstone. Haven't been able to see that, or Nowhere Man, or some of those weirder ones. American Gothic, thankfully we got eventually, but who knows? I don't think anything's lost. That's my point.
Right.
I don't think there's any television we watched post 70s to now that is truly lost to time like previously had been. It's just, when will we see it, not if.
Right. The joke that I keep making is if the show is not streaming and it's not on DVD, I'm doing a book about it because 30-something, Letterman, Moonlighting are all not available. Yeah. So why am I wasting my time doing these books? And it's because I love them. Yeah.
And also, I mean, for the people who are fans of those shows, if they can't get the show, get talking about the show or reading about the show, that kind of scratches that itch a little bit. SCTV is another one for me, and that was music rights because they literally never asked. They would just use stuff because they were used to doing stuff on stage,
Right.
If we need to play the Led Zeppelin song for this sketch, play the Led Zeppelin song. And so that's what they just did on TV, and no one even checked. So they literally, like, the best example is there's a fake ad for like an LP, like a KTEL LP of just covers of Stairway to Heaven called Stairways to Heaven. And then it plays all the songs and they're all by different artists. So it's like Slim Whitman, but it's just Stairway to Heaven
Uh-huh.
27 different ways. And, Led Zeppelin is almost like the Beatles and they don't license stuff.
Right.
And it's like, you just did. How'd you get the rights? And they're like, oh, we didn't. It's like,
and really, who cares? I mean, that's the thing about these rights things that start to annoy me. Again, as someone who corporations are fine to steal from me.
Yeah.
All the time.
I don't think it's the artist. I think you have, especially at a certain level, they become an industry unto themselves. And, they have on staff, they have a lawyer and they have these people who have to sort of justify their salary. And part of that is negotiating these rights or saying no to stuff, playing hardball where that stuff doesn't even trickle down to the person, which is why when you can ask them directly.
I was heartbroken when a month or two ago, Bob Dylan sold his entire catalog to MCA or whoever. And I thought, how many shows have a Dylan song in it? Deadwood and that Don Cheadle show, House of Lies used. I mean, there's just so many. And I thought those people are going to make it that much harder for that stuff to ever come out.
Well, now they can hold things hostage. Like they can go, well, you got everything except this one. And it'd be a shame if you couldn't, right. And it becomes that kind of thing. And it is annoying. I think we'll get to a place where that won't be a problem. I think now with the studios and the old way they used to make things having disappeared and them not really understanding how to make money off stuff and the Netflix model being insane where they're like, we don't care if everybody who has this subscription watches this. That's not good for us. We need new people to sign up. So we'll cancel our hit show in 3 seasons because it's no longer of value. Once that stuff settles, I think we'll see people stop trying to, scrounge for these scraps and try to make money out of this stuff any way they can and squeeze, blood from a stone and just kind of give into, yeah, all right. It's going to be less than we want.
So. You have a lot more hope than me. I did because I, can ask for anything. I don't know why. But when the last time I was interviewing Glenn, we were talking about the DVD rights. I said, look, if you get to do a Blu-ray release or streaming, can I help? I said, let me help because I want to be sure that you guys get it right because there actually are some cold opens that never came out on the DVD. They're lost. They are up on YouTube, but because people saved them.
Yeah.
And they messed up a couple of the songs where it's not exactly right. And I was, you have to be careful because obviously this is his legacy and his art. And, I don't want to say like, look, you botched the DVD.
You're screwing it up. Yeah.
But I just said, let me help. I just want to help. I just want to take a look at it before you thing. And he said, what's your name again? And I said, it's Bruce Willis.
Yes.
And he laughed. And so we'll see if it ever does happen. I hope it does because I think people should watch Moonlighting. Not all of it holds up. The pilot really doesn't hold up. It feels really old, like pilots often do in the 80s.
And it was... the pilot, especially of that, they were leaning a little bit too far into the retro screwball comedy aspect. So even then, it felt like a 1930s kind of throwback thing. So that didn't help.
No, and I've never liked the pilot of Moonlighting. It just is not the same as the rest of the series. And even, they say in the book, it took about 3 or 4 episodes, which, that always happens before they really got into what the show is. And those things, it's still funny. It's still there.
It is. And, to wrap up, because I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, the guest stars on that show. I mean, literally Orson Welles' final on-screen performance is to do a cold open gag on Moonlighting, and it aired like 3 days after he died. It's like,
well, and we're just talking about a time gone by. They didn't promo it. They didn't tell anyone that Orson Welles was going to be in it, and he just died, and they had it. Now think about that. Think about if I don't know, like Brad Pitt did a guest shot on Law and Order, and then he died, and they had it as Brad Pitt's last thing, and NBC was like, you know what? Let's not tell anyone.
Yeah,
Let's just let people tune in and be shocked that we had it. Like, no way. They would be putting it everywhere. It would be beat into your head and no one knew. You just turned on Moonlighting and holy crap, there's Orson Welles. He just died. How did this happen?
Yeah.
And everyone, that's a big part of the book. Everyone talking about getting to meet Orson. It's a great story as well.
Yeah. I mean, and there's also so many great character actors or sort of that guy actors in the 5 seasons that really got to do some interesting, cool stuff. That Curtis, a big one, and like Charles Rocket. Charles Rocket is sort of written off as a, he had a very sad end and it's sort of a footnote in SNL history. But what a fascinating guy who did some really amazing work. And maybe 8 episodes or so. He's on quite a few episodes of Moonlighting.
Yeah, because he plays David's brother.
Yeah, and he's great. He's great. Or Virginia Madison's in 2 or 3 episodes and does some stuff that you don't normally get to see her do in things.
Yeah, I couldn't get to Virginia, and she has a social media presence and a website, and I don't know if just none of my emails got to her. I was disappointed that I couldn't interview Virginia, but I did get Dana Delaney, Ray Wise, David Patrick Kelly, because I'd interviewed them for other things, and then I would ask them Moonlighting stuff. So I could get, and Paul Sorvino is another actor who's in it. Yeah, there's a lot of people got their start on Moonlighting. And
that should be accessible. Or it's, for people who are fans of those actors, it'd be nice to see a chunk of stuff they did.
Yeah, before they were, huge. And Curtis Armstrong, I did get to interview him.
He's the best.
He was such a great guy. I mean, so intelligent. You think of him as Booger because that's where we all met him from Revenge of the Nerds. But he was so thoughtful. And every question that I asked him, he didn't just shoot his mouth off. He thought, and I really respected and liked him so much. It was a great interview. Yeah, and he has such a complicated relationship with that show. Mm-hmm. In that he was a fan of it, he likes it, but it was also a really not fun time for him in a lot of ways. Yeah, which he's not shy about talking about. And that kind of sums up that show. People could have a terrible time or have it be almost like traumatic to have been on that show and still be proud of being a part of that show. Well, I mean, honestly, on the people that I interviewed, I would say 50% of them are still to this day traumatized from working on it. That's how hard of a show that it was. And, they did struggle. Curtis tells a story about how Bruce would not do sides with him. Yeah. And he's like, one time he did, and he's like, I was so impressed, but I shouldn't have been impressed because that's just professional. And they were all open. The book is not full of, it's not my style to bring something down. But that show, there was so much drama that it was bound to it's part of it. Yeah. You can't. It's just truthful. Yeah. Yeah. And Curtis is a perfect guy to relay that stuff in a way that doesn't seem like salacious. Right. It's really a unique way that he tells the stories on that show. Like I'm sure he told you the story about the first day he was on set when he met Cybill. It didn't go well, that kind of thing, where it's just great. Or the Curtis Armstrong Day prank that, Bruce Willis really meanly played on him, or, but it's all part of the fabric of that show. And, it affected what was on screen. I guess that's the difference. Right. In some shows, if we're talking the Brady Bunch, there was a lot of horrible and salacious stuff that went on behind the scenes there, but
it doesn't affect the show itself. It has nothing to do with the show itself. Whereas with Moonlighting, it did. They addressed it on screen.
Yeah. I mean, there's a very famous episode with, it's funny that her name just went out of my head, but she was Rona Barrett.
Yes.
Where the whole show is Rona Barrett was the Barbara Walters of that time, or maybe now Barbara Walters isn't Barbara Walters anymore. So I don't know who would be today's Rona Barrett, but and it's all about that backstage stuff, and they have a whole episode built around that. And those were the creative things that they weren't afraid to lean into. And I don't think Bruce and Cybill minded from talking with Cybill. She thought it was funny. She didn't care that they were basically making fun of her because I think they knew it was true.
Yeah. It's kind of that thing like we'll address it before someone else does.
Yeah.
And then we at least have control over it. Well, I'm very excited for the book. I'll put up links for everyone to read it there. And so do you have one plan? I know you want to do the David E. Kelly thing, but do you have something in the pipeline?
Well, I do. Yeah, I'm actually started my next book. I haven't really said what it is, but I mean, I'll say what it is.
Okay, if you're comfortable. I don't want to be scoop.
Well, nah, who cares?
Yeah.
I don't know why. It's so hard because you don't want someone to get there before you. But next year is 2022. And do you know what movie came out 30 years before there?
Oh, so it'd be 92.
92. Think about.
You got T2. You got Fire Walk with Me?
Fire Walk with Me came out. So I'm doing a book about the 30th anniversary of Fire Walk with Me. I've already started the interviews. I've got some great ones. So that book will come out in 2022.
Oh, nice. I'm very excited for that as a big fan of Fire Walk with Me. I was just talking about it the other day.
I've learned, I thought I knew a lot, but I'm actually discovering some great stuff. So that will be my next project. So it won't be television, but kinda, because it's
it sort of is. Yeah. Oh, great. So we'll look forward to that. And the new Moonlighting book is out soon, and I'll put up links there. Thank you so much. It's been great talking to you again. And we'll have to do this again when Fire Walk with Me book comes out.
Yeah. Debuting on your show.
That's right. Ooh. Scoop. We got a scoop. Yeah.
Yeah. So now a bunch of writers are like, what? That's next year? The book out before him.
Well, I mean, Wayne's World's that. They could go for that, Well,
that's true. I actually make a joke about, I've already started writing the book, and Laura Flynn Boyle played Donna. She didn't want to do Fire Walk with Me. She did Wayne's World. And I say in the book, so you can bust me for this if it happens, I said, I don't think anyone's doing a 30th anniversary of Wayne's World. So we'll see if Laura Flynn Boyle made the right choice or not. So I guess we'll find out.
She's also in How I Got into College in '89 with Charles Rocket.
It's all connected, man. It's all connected.
You're getting in the right mindset for that Twin Peaks. There you go. That's Scott. That's Moonlighting. If you have the DVDs, you have the DVDs. If you don't, I don't know where you can watch Moonlighting. But, if you find a place, let me know. I will share it with listeners, and I will share it with people on the Patreon. Patreon.com/TV Guidance Counselor. Thank you guys so much, everyone who gives to the Patreon. It is what gets me through every month financially for the show, at least. I do have my day gig, but it covers all my costs, and I don't lose money from the show. But that's okay, even if I did. I enjoy doing it regardless. We are 500 plus episodes and 8 years in here and still going strong. We have a bunch of bonus episodes this month, and if you're a patron, you will get bonus episodes early. Sometimes you'll get exclusive bonus episodes, and let me know if there are things you would like to see as a patron, and I will do my best to get those to you. Also, if you have guests you want to see on the show, tvguidancecounselor@gmail.com or ken@kenread.com. Or if you want to wear some Ken Read or TV Guidance Counselor merchandise, we have a bunch of designs up on our TeePublic site, tpublic.com/user/TV Guidance Counselor. And there's a bunch of designs on there. They're print on demand, but they're very good quality. You can get phone cases, you can get t-shirts, sweatshirts, all kinds of fun stuff. So there's a wide variety of things you can do. And you know what? It's your right as a human being to do none of them. So anyway, I'll be here next week. I hope you will too for a brand new edition of TV Guidance Counselor.
Courage